In January 2026, approximately 13,500 Norwegian citizens received letters from their government, not tax notices, not census forms, property requisition warnings, your home, your vehicle, your boat. The military may need these if war comes. Anders Jernberg, head of Norway's military logistics, put it plainly. The importance of being prepared for crisis and war has increased dramatically in recent years. Our society must be prepared for security policy crises and, in the worst case, war. This is Norway, one of NATO's wealthiest, most stable members, methodically preparing its civilian population for armed conflict on European soil. When a nation that has enjoyed 70 years of peace begins cataloguing which homes could house soldiers and which fishing boats could support naval operations, something fundamental has shifted. Norway's national security strategy stated explicitly in May 2025 that the country faces the most serious security policy situation since World War II. The question is not whether Norway is overreacting. The question is whether the rest of us are paying sufficient attention to what Norway sees. For decades following the Cold War, the Norwegian-Russian border represented one of Europe's most stable frontiers. Cooperative fishing agreements, environmental research, the 196-kilometre land border in the Arctic was lightly defended, pragmatically managed, a testament to the belief that great power neighbours could coexist through dialogue. That equilibrium shattered. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and then something more immediate, systematic Russian military expansion in the Arctic, accompanied by what Norwegian authorities now document as a dramatic increase in espionage, reconnaissance, and hybrid operations along Norway's northern border. Brigadier General John Olav Fulham, commander of Norway's Finnmark Brigade, the northernmost military unit guarding that border, told Swedish media that Russian intelligence activities have risen markedly. We see a greater threat up here, and it's primarily about espionage and the collection of information. Russian operatives posing as fishermen, tourists conducting reconnaissance of military installations, fishing vessels entering Norwegian ports, and systematically photographing naval infrastructure, mapping defensive positions, identifying vulnerabilities. But it's not just human intelligence. In summer 2023, 12 Norwegian government ministries were hit with coordinated cyber attacks. The Tromsø port, Norway's largest fisheries hub, was targeted by Russian cyber operations. The Arctic University of Norway experienced an advanced breach of its digital systems, and then the drones. Norwegian authorities documented a sudden proliferation of drone activity over strategic sites in 2023, with the extent of foreign operations significantly exceeding previously recorded levels. This is grey zone warfare, activities below the threshold of conventional military action, but designed systematically to erode security, test response capabilities, and map vulnerabilities for future exploitation. It operates in the blurred space between war and peace, rendering traditional military deterrence insufficient. Norway cannot address these threats through military force alone. When adversaries target civilian infrastructure, government databases, academic institutions and port facilities simultaneously, preparedness becomes a whole-of-society imperative. The property requisition campaign transforms ordinary citizens from passive observers into conscious participants in national defence. Your vehicle isn't just your vehicle anymore, it's a potential logistics asset. Your coastal property isn't just your home, it's a position that might need to be used or denied to adversaries. The acceleration of Norwegian preparedness cannot be separated from the revolutionary transformation of the Nordic region itself. Finland joined NATO on April 4, 2023. Sweden followed on March 7, 2024. These represented the most significant strategic realignment in Northern Europe since the end of the Cold War. Finland's accession added 1,340 kilometres of direct NATO-Russia border in the Arctic. Overnight, the alliance's contact with Russian forces expanded from a single point, the Norwegian border with Russia's heavily militarised Kola Peninsula, to an extended frontier spanning hundreds of kilometres of difficult Arctic terrain. Sweden's membership completed the Nordic NATO bloc, placing all Nordic members on contiguous territory and enabling coordinated defence planning that would have been unthinkable during the era of Swedish neutrality. For Norway, this created both strategic opportunities and heightened burdens. The Nordic countries can now coordinate military operations, share intelligence seamlessly, and plan reinforcement across previously independent national borders. In June 2024, Norway, Finland and Sweden announced establishment of a trilateral military transport corridor designed to streamline logistics and equipment movement across the High North. This enables rapid concentration of force in any sub-region and complicates Russian planning for potential military action. But it also placed Norway at the front line of the most significant NATO expansion since the Cold War, with all the Russian attention and military pressure that accompanies that position. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Alexis Grinkwich, emphasized that, with 7 of 8 Arctic nations inside the alliance, the other one being Russia, we will and we can get this right. That statement contains an implicit acknowledgement. The Arctic has become a theatre of NATO-Russia confrontation. The Cold Response 2026 exercise, scheduled for March with 20,000 to 25,000 personnel from 14 nations, including approximately 4,000 American soldiers, demonstrates the scale of this integration. Allied forces will train across Norwegian, Swedish and Finnish territory simultaneously. Troop movements will cross borders from Norwegian regions into Finnish Lapland, from Swedish territory into Finland. These aren't symbolic gestures. These are rehearsals for rapid Allied response to potential Russian military action in the Arctic. Norway is backing this strategic shift with extraordinary financial commitment. The 2026 defence budget includes approximately 180 billion Norwegian kroner in total defence spending, with 112 billion specifically devoted to national defence operations. That's an increase of 4.2 billion kroner from 2025. More significantly, Norway has committed to meeting NATO's 5% of GDP defence spending pledge by 2035, allocating at least 3.5% for core defence, plus up to 1.5% for broader security expenditures, including cyber defence, critical infrastructure hardening, and defence industrial innovation. This places Norway among the most defence-focused NATO members by spending intensity. Northern Norway is receiving approximately 3.2 billion kroner specifically for military property, buildings and facilities in 2026. Setermoen Garrison, Norway's largest military installation housing 1,500 personnel, is being expanded and modernised. Porsangmoen military base in Finnmark is undergoing comprehensive upgrades. The Finnmark Brigade itself is expanding toward its planned 1,300 troop force by 2032, with new barracks, training facilities, and logistics infrastructure. One of the most symbolically significant investments involves Bardufoss Air Station, Norway's oldest airbase, established in 1938 but inactive for 40 years, which began F-35 fighter jet operations in June 2024. The base has been upgraded with mountain hangars that protect F-35s during peacetime storage and provide hardened shelter during potential conflict. Its reactivation disperses Norwegian air combat capability across multiple bases, making it vastly more difficult for adversaries to degrade Norwegian air power through strikes on concentrated facilities. And then there's Andøya Air Station in northern Norway, being revitalised as a strategic base for long-range surveillance drones and allied aircraft. This represents a reversal of 2016 parliamentary decisions to close the base, an acknowledgement that what seemed rational during a period of relative calm has become strategically untenable, given the contemporary threat environment. These investments communicate resolve, not just to domestic audiences, not just to NATO allies, but directly to Moscow. They demonstrate that Norway is prepared to defend its territory, that it will maintain credible military capability in the Arctic, and that Allied reinforcement infrastructure is being systematically established across the High North. While Russia remains Norway's immediate neighbour and primary military threat, there's a longer-term strategic challenge that Norwegian planners are tracking closely: expanding Sino-Russian cooperation in the Arctic. General Grinkwich has emphasized that Russia and China are increasingly coordinating activities in the Arctic region. Joint naval patrols, coordinated research vessel operations, explicit strategic cooperation designed to challenge NATO capabilities and reshape Arctic governance structures. According to Grinkwich, Russian and Chinese vessels are conducting more and more joint patrols. Chinese icebreakers and research vessels are in Arctic waters, and their research is not for peaceful purposes, it's to gain a military advantage. China established the China-Russia Arctic Shipping Lanes Cooperation Subcommittee in May 2024, formalized during the November meeting of China-Russia Prime Ministers in St. Petersburg. This isn't commercial convenience. This is institutional commitment to coordinated Arctic development that extends into strategic partnership. The subcommittee focuses on Arctic shipping lane development, polar ship technology, logistics infrastructure, and removal of barriers to Chinese and Russian shipping in Arctic waters. What this threatens is the creation of a Sino-Russian sphere of influence in the Arctic that excludes Western interests, potentially disrupts NATO's ability to conduct operations in Arctic waters, and creates synchronized pressure on Arctic states from both great power competitors simultaneously. For Norway, this means the threat is not merely Russian but potentially coordinated between two adversarial powers with complementary capabilities and strategic interests. And then there's Greenland. President Trump's repeated proposals to acquire the Danish territory and threats of economic coercion against European allies that resist his ambitions have inserted unprecedented intra-NATO tension into Arctic security calculations. European NATO members, including Germany, France, Sweden, and Norway, have responded by visibly strengthening Arctic defence commitments. Germany dispatched military personnel to Greenland to map framework conditions for possible military contributions. Norway sent 2 service members to map further cooperation between NATO allies. France deployed forces under Operation Arctic Endurance, with President Macron stating that Europeans have a particular responsibility as this territory belongs to the European Union. These coordinated responses represent NATO allies attempting to address genuine Arctic security challenges while managing unprecedented political tensions within the alliance itself. The Greenland question has become a stress test for alliance cohesion at precisely the moment when strategic competition with Russia and China demands unity. The property requisition campaign represents one visible element of a comprehensive national preparedness strategy that encompasses military modernization, civil defense readiness, critical infrastructure hardening, and societal mobilization. Norway's National Security Strategy, released in May 2025, provides the framework: rapidly strengthen defense capability through military investments, ensure adequate military deterrence through credible force posture, and maintain NATO as the core security framework while keeping the United States engaged and committed to European and Arctic security. But military preparedness alone is insufficient. Norway is establishing a long-term plan for civil preparedness covering all critical sectors of society. Hospitals must maintain surge capacity for mass casualties. Food supply chains must remain functional despite disruptions. Energy infrastructure must survive attacks and be rapidly restored. Government institutions must maintain continuity during enemy action. The government has established a common council structure for preparedness planning at national level, drawn up fundamental security requirements for critical undertakings, and designated the Ministry of Justice and Public Security as the permanent lead ministry for national civil crises. This coordination ensures that when the military requisitions civilian property, there are mechanisms to track those assets, compensate owners appropriately, and integrate civilian resources into military operations systematically rather than chaotically. The property requisition notices serve multiple functions. They identify and register resources the military could employ, residences that could house troops, vehicles useful for logistics, boats that could support naval operations. They communicate to civilians that national defence requires societal participation beyond volunteering for military service. And critically, they ensure property owners maintain equipment in serviceable condition, knowing it could be requisitioned, understanding that this represents temporary wartime use in national defence rather than permanent confiscation. Norway's long-term defence plan envisions growing the Norwegian army from 1 brigade to 3 by the 2030s, expanding the Home Guard to 45,000 troops, concentrating significant resources on border garrisons in the most exposed regions. These are not preparations for a conflict Norway expects next month or next year. These are investments designed for persistent readiness across a generation. What Norway's leadership has concluded, and what the property requisition campaign makes tangible for ordinary citizens, is that the distinction between war and peace has become dangerously blurred, that the security environment facing the country is qualitatively different from what existed even 5 years ago. That Russian intelligence operations, cyber attacks, drone reconnaissance, and systematic pressure along the border represent not isolated provocations, but coordinated strategic competition that could escalate to conventional conflict under certain circumstances. Norway is taking the world as it is, a world where its primary neighbour has demonstrated willingness to use military force against sovereign nations, where hybrid warfare targets civilian infrastructure and government institutions, where great power competition in the Arctic involves not just Russia, but increasingly China as well, where NATO cohesion faces internal tensions even as external threats intensify. The property requisition campaign is Norway's way of communicating to its citizens and to the world that it understands this reality and is preparing accordingly, not with panic, not with alarmism, but with systematic, comprehensive and sustained mobilization of resources across military and civilian domains. It remains to be seen whether this level of preparation will prove necessary, whether diplomacy can de-escalate tensions, whether NATO cohesion will hold despite internal strains, whether Russia will calculate that the costs of confrontation exceed any potential gains. But what is already clear is that Norway is not waiting to find out. It is preparing for the worst while working toward the best, and in doing so, it is setting a standard for preparedness that other NATO members may soon need to match.